What if your biggest failure wasn't what you said aloud, but what you couldn't keep silent inside your mind? You may think power comes from expression, from voicing every thought, from being real and telling it like it is. But the truth is this: power belongs to the man who controls his tongue, because it proves he has already conquered his thoughts. Criticism is cheap, gossip is free, but self-restraint, that's expensive. It costs you ego. It costs you reaction. It costs you the right to be temporarily satisfied in exchange for being permanently elevated. That's why I said, if you must speak ill of another, do not speak it. Write it in the sand near the water's edge. Because anger is not strength, spite is not justice, and silence, when chosen, can be the loudest message of all. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if every word you spoke was either a seed of growth or never spoken at all? There was a man I once studied. His name was Luther. He was not born into wealth, not groomed for power, not even respected in his early years. He was a clerk in a rail station, a quiet man, no commanding voice, no evident charisma, no hunger for applause. But he had one strength most men lacked. He knew when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Let me take you into his story. Luther worked under a supervisor named Caldwell, an ambitious, boisterous man who loved the sound of his own voice more than the weight of his responsibilities. Caldwell would blame others for his failures, often making Luther the target. In meetings, in memos, in passing conversations, he would subtly and sometimes overtly humiliate him. Most men would snap, defend themselves, fight back with words, but Luther did something else. He watched, he listened, and above all, he endured, not because he lacked courage, but because he understood. A man who speaks in anger gives his enemy free access to his soul. Luther knew that fire must be controlled to forge steel, and so he gathered every insult, every misstep Caldwell made, silently. He kept notes, he observed inefficiencies, he recorded missed targets, false reports, poor planning, but he never said a word, until one day he spoke once. Just once, in a meeting with senior executives. They were reviewing quarterly failures. Caldwell was preparing to scapegoat Luther again, but this time Luther stood. With calm precision, he unfolded a file. Inside it were 6 months of documented mismanagement, backed with proof, reports, dates, and signatures. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply presented truth, undeniable, cold, and clean. By the end of the meeting, Caldwell was dismissed. Luther was promoted, and not just once. Within 5 years, he was head of operations. 10 years later, CEO. His silence had not been fear, it had been strategy. His restraint wasn't weakness, it was calculated power. Let me tell you what I learned from Luther. Most men confuse reaction with strength. But true power is measured not by how quickly you speak, but by how long you can hold your truth without trembling. There is an emotional economy to life. Every word you speak either adds value or bleeds it. Gossip is emotional bankruptcy. Anger is emotional inflation. But silence, when chosen, is emotional wealth. And let us be very clear, the man who governs his tongue governs his destiny. Every time we are wronged, the emotional reflex screams, defend, attack, justify. It feels like survival, like if you don't react, you will vanish. But this is the great lie. Reaction is not survival, it is surrender. It surrenders your focus, your energy, your peace, your dignity. Most men lose battles because they are baited into fighting ghosts. Luther did not deny his emotions. He transmuted them. He used anger as focus, frustration as discipline, silence as weaponry. This is the alchemy of greatness, not to be free of feeling, but to wield it like a master blacksmith. Every insult became a thread in the net. Every delay became fuel. Every dismissal became depth. When you can hold tension without release, you grow powerful beyond measure. When Luther finally spoke, it was not for vengeance, it was for truth. He wasn't reactive, he was decisive. He wasn't emotional, he was exact. This is what makes kings of commoners, the ability to wait until the world is ready and then speak once to shift it. Now, let me ask you, what conflict in your life have you been reacting to when you could have been preparing to win it? What if your silence today is not a weakness, but the most powerful move on the board? What would you see more clearly if your emotions weren't screaming? Who would you become if you mastered the pause? I've seen empires fall from careless speech. I've seen marriages crumble from words meant to harm. I've seen men lose fortunes because they couldn't stay silent when it mattered most. And I've seen legends rise because they understood this. The man who controls his mouth has already mastered his mind, and the man who masters his mind, he becomes unbreakable. There is no such thing as an idle thought. Every thought you entertain carries weight. It carves into your mind the grooves of habit, molds your decisions, and begins shaping the unseen scaffolding of your future. Let me say it plainly. Reality is first built in thought, and only then in stone. This may sound poetic, but I do not speak in poetry. I speak in blueprints. Let us begin, then, with what I call the unseen blueprint, the structure of reality that forms behind the veil of perception, long before the world acknowledges its shape. And let me show you exactly how that structure is built, layer by layer, from the raw material of thought. I once worked with a man named Ellison. He was a craftsman by trade, a builder of fine wooden boats. But more than that, he was a man obsessed with precision. Every curve, every joint, every beam had to reflect not only function, but something deeper, intention. He told me, Napoleon, I can tell by looking at a hull whether it was built by a man who was confident or by a man who was afraid. I smiled. I knew exactly what he meant, because thought leaves fingerprints in your voice, in your posture, in your decisions, in your outcomes. Ellison began his career as most do, in repetition. He built according to the plans others gave him. He followed the designs. He used the tools. He stayed within the frame of what was considered safe and proper. And yet his work failed to sell, not because it was faulty, not because it was unattractive, but because it lacked soul. He was a builder, but not yet a creator. One winter, a storm destroyed several vessels in a northern harbor. Ellison was hired to salvage what he could. What he found struck him to his core. Boats with identical blueprints had cracked in identical places, not from poor design, but from flawed intention. He realized the men who had built them were pressured, rushed, distracted, or worse, indifferent, and it showed. That night he burned all his templates. He vowed to never again build from someone else's plan until he had first built from within. Most people believe they are thinking when they are merely remembering. They believe they are imagining when they are merely replaying. Their minds are filled not with vision, but with echoes. These echoes form passive thought. And passive thought builds passive lives. You want to know why so many people feel stuck, why they take action but make no progress, why they repeat the same financial mistakes, the same relational patterns, the same fears, because they have become factories for the thoughts of others. They wake up and receive. They absorb, they scroll, they compare, they respond, but they do not initiate. And without initiation, there is no authorship. You cannot create a life of meaning while running on borrowed momentum. Now let us turn to the man who changes this. Ellison withdrew for 40 days. No clients, no clocks, no blueprints. He woke each morning with a single question. What would I build if I feared nothing? And each night he recorded the visions that came, not goals, not strategies, images, shapes, impressions, emotions. He didn't need a plan. He needed alignment. When I speak of imagination, most think of fantasy. But imagination is not daydreaming. It is the divine mechanism by which you preview destiny. Every advancement mankind has made, every monument, machine, and miracle first appeared in one place only, the workshop of the mind. The reason most men fail is not lack of knowledge, it is lack of image clarity. You cannot hit what you cannot see. You cannot hold what you cannot name. So Ellison began to imagine deliberately the lines of the boat as metaphors for movement through challenge. the curvature of wood as a symbol of surrender to flow, the deck as a place for stillness, not spectacle. And with each vision, he drew. And with each drawing, he carved. And with each carving, he became not a builder of boats, but a builder of meaning. The boats he built after that, each one sold within days. Collectors came from across oceans, not because the boats were perfect, but because they carried presence. What changed? Not the wood, not the technique, but the thought. This is where the process becomes spiritual. You do not lead others because you command them. You lead others because your thinking shapes their thinking. A man who governs his thought with courage, clarity, and creativity becomes a magnetic force. People listen when he speaks. Opportunities appear when he moves. Doors open where once there were only walls. Why? Because reality bends in service to the man who knows exactly what he is building. Let me be plain. Your results do not reflect your desires, they reflect your patterns of thought. When I interviewed Henry Ford, he told me, "I see the car in my head before I see it on the road." Edison said, "My inventions are not mine. They are answers to questions I never stop asking." They were not playing with ideas. They were forging certainty. So I ask you, what are you thinking today that builds the tomorrow you want? If your thoughts were visible as blueprints, what structure would they reveal? Would it be a palace or a prison? Would it be filled with echoes or elevation? Because whether you know it or not, you are building. The only question is, are you building with intention or inertia? This is the forge, the place where thought becomes fire, where decision becomes steel, where imagination becomes architecture. And it is here you must return again and again if you are to live not just as a man of good ideas, but as a man who commands his destiny. Your mind is not passive. It is not reactive. It is a furnace, a forge, a temple. Treat it as such, and watch the world reflect back the greatness you have always carried within. There comes a time in every great man's journey when he must stop speaking, stop seeking, and stop proving, and begin listening, not to the world, not to others, but to the voice that exists beneath all others, the voice of self-authority. This voice is not loud, it does not shout, it does not compete, it whispers, and most men miss it. Not because it is hidden, but because they are too loud to hear it. Let me introduce you to a man named Morris. He was not a titan of industry, nor a legendary statesman. He was, in fact, a man who had failed quietly, over and over again. Morris worked in finance. He had talent, intelligence, even charm, but his life was a revolving door of missed opportunities. Every time he came close to success, something collapsed. A partner backed out, a deal soured, a sudden illness, a wave of doubt that paralyzed him at the final step. When I first met him, I could feel it instantly. The man had power, but he had no stillness. He was all motion, all stimulation. He had read every book, attended every seminar, recited every affirmation, and yet he was exhausted. When I asked him how often he sat in silence with himself, he laughed. He thought it was a trick question, but I was entirely serious. We live in a world that confuses consumption with growth. We devour information. We binge insights. We chase hacks, frameworks, and secrets, but we rarely digest what we consume. The result, mental indigestion, spiritual nausea, emotional fatigue. Morris was a man full of ideas, but void of identity. Because identity does not come from information. It comes from integration. You can read my words 1,000 times. You can quote my passages. You can even teach my philosophy. But until you hear yourself in the silence, until you become the source of your own convictions, you are still living as an echo. Morris was an echo, and echoes do not build legacies. So I gave him a task. Not a book, not a goal, not a challenge. I asked him to sit in silence for 1 hour a day for 30 days. No music, no notes, no interruptions, just himself, a chair, and a blank journal. He resisted. He argued. He said it felt unproductive. And I told him, if your productivity depends on distraction, you are not productive. You are reactive. The first week was torture. He squirmed, he paced, he fought boredom, doubt, and guilt. But something happened on the 10th day. He heard his own voice, not his inner critic, not his motivator, not his analyst, his creator. Stillness is not inactivity. It is not laziness. It is sovereignty. It is the moment when the mind stops reacting to the world and starts reordering it. The greatest leaders I interviewed, Carnegie, Ford, Edison, Roosevelt, all had one thing in common. They spent time each day alone in quiet reflection. They were not escaping responsibility, they were sharpening it. Carnegie told me, I never make a decision without first conferring with my inner counsel. What is this inner counsel? It is the assembled wisdom of your subconscious. It is your intuition, your history, your instincts, organized in silence. Stillness is not the absence of thought, it is the elevation of thought. Morris began to write things in his journal he had never said aloud. Fears he didn't know he carried, desires he hadn't dared to pursue. He wasn't journaling tasks, he was transcribing truth. He stopped asking, what should I do? And started asking, who must I become? And from that question came clarity. He left a toxic business partnership. He reconciled with his estranged brother. He created a financial coaching program rooted in integrity. But more than that, he liked himself again, because he finally heard himself again. Let me explain something that will change your life. Success is not a matter of external pursuit. It is a matter of internal permission. Most people fail not because they lack opportunity, but because they are not integrated enough to accept it. You can't receive what your nervous system cannot handle. You can't sustain what your self-concept cannot support. And you can't lead others when you are still fragmented inside. Morris learned to lead from stillness, and from that stillness came alignment, and from alignment came magnetism. He became a man people trusted. Because he trusted himself, he became a man people followed, because he no longer chased. This is the sanctuary. It is not a place of escape. It is a place of emergence. It is where the noise stops and your true voice begins. It is where decisions are made, not based on fear, but on foundation. You do not need another course. You do not need another quote. You do not need more proof. You need presence. You need permission. You need stillness. And from there, you will rise with clarity, with calm, with conviction, because now you are no longer echoing greatness. You are embodying it. And that, my friend, is where the path changes forever. By now, if you've walked with me this far, you've come to understand a fundamental truth. Reality does not answer to noise. It answers to alignment. Not the loudest man, not the most informed man, not even the most gifted man, but the one who governs his thoughts, commands his emotions, and walks in complete harmony with his highest intention. This is the final domain, the seat of dominion, where no further permission is needed, where no more approval is sought, where life is no longer begged from. It is shaped by decree, and it is here, in this invisible throne room, that mastery begins to echo. Let me tell you a final story, one I've rarely spoken of. His name was Lawson Kane, a name you will not find in history books, but one I will never forget. Lawson was a man born with nothing, no inheritance, no legacy, no promise, but he had decision, and from that decision, everything else grew. He came to me after reading the 10th chapter of Think and Grow Rich, the one I labeled Power of the Mastermind. But what struck him wasn't the idea of teamwork. It was the subtext. If minds can be joined in power, why can't one mind become powerful enough to create alone? He didn't mean isolated. He meant integrated, unified, undistracted, unshaken, a mind that was one with itself, not split, not borrowed, not battling the ghosts of opinion, fear, or doubt. Most men are not at war with the world. They are at war with themselves. Their words say, I will rise. Their thoughts say, I am unworthy. Their emotions say, I am afraid. Their actions say, I don't believe. And so the universe, ever obedient, says, very well. The greatest deception is self-fracture, the illusion that you can move forward while still divided within. Lawson realized this early. He saw his doubt every time he made a promise he didn't keep. He saw his fear every time he hesitated before a bold step. He saw his lack of alignment when he presented confidence outwardly, but collapsed internally the moment results did not arrive. He wrote me a letter. Mr. Hill, I've studied your principles. I've written affirmations. I've visualized goals, but I still waver. I still delay. I still sabotage. Tell me the truth. Am I missing something, or am I just weak? I responded with 2 words. Neither. You are divided. He asked what to do. I told him, you must become one mind, not many. He didn't know what I meant, so I sent him an exercise, a decree. What is a decree? It is not a wish. It is not a desire. It is not a goal. A decree is a spiritual command, a verdict from the throne of consciousness. You do not decree from fear. You do not decree from confusion. You decree from total clarity, total alignment, and total ownership. The exercise was simple. Each morning, for 30 days, Lawson would rise before sunrise. He would sit in silence, place his hand over his chest, and say aloud, "This is what I believe. This is who I am. This is what I create." And then he would declare his vision, not as a hope, but as a reality being summoned. I will leave you with one final invitation. If these teachings have aligned with something deep within you, if this journey has felt like the recovery of a truth you always knew but had forgotten, then join me. Subscribe to this channel. Activate the bell. Become part of a movement of minds reclaiming their dominion. Because this is not content. This is consciousness in motion. This is not information. This is reformation. And your presence here, it is no accident. It is a sign, a signal that you are ready, ready to rise, ready to lead, ready to decree. So stand up now, square your shoulders, look into the mirror and say, I am the master of my fate, the builder of my world, the author of what will be, and walk forward, not to chase your future, but to claim it. The throne awaits. The dominion is yours. Rule wisely, rule boldly, rule now. See you in the next journey.